I think we've got an excellent lineup. So the format that we're going to go through today is that I'm going to begin by doing a brief introduction to each of our panelists before inviting them each in turn to do a 10-minute presentation on their particular specialist area. So I'll introduce them in the order in which they will be presenting. And the first of these will be, the panelist will be Steve Dann, who's got the follically challenged style in the right-hand corner of your screen. Steve is CEO and co-founder of Medical Realities. He founded the company in partnership with a very famous surgeon, and together they've been pioneering the use of virtual reality for medical education and training. Next up will be Lucia Pannese, whom I've known for many years. She doesn't bear the scars, hopefully, of knowing me, but we've had a long and happy relationship in the serious games field. Lucia is a CEO and founder of a company called Imaginary, who are based in Italy, and they're one of the leading serious games developers in Europe. And Lucia is going to be talking about the use of VR and immersive technologies in the area of rehabilitation, particularly about their flagship product called Rehability. And last but not least, we have Ricardo Sainz, who's joining us from Barcelona. Ricardo specializes in mental health. He's got a great deal of experience as a clinician in this field. And most recently, he's been working with a company who developed virtual reality applications, particularly for mental health issues. So he's going to be talking about that. And I'm not apologizing for the fact, but finally, I will be doing a presentation, or at least a demonstration of the use of a gamified immersive environment for preventative healthcare. And that will only, the game only lasts 6 minutes in the most, so you won't have to endure too much of that. So now, Steve, I'm presuming that you have your presentation lined up, and if I make you a co-host, you will be able to deliver that presentation for me.
Fantastic, thank you, David.
Okay, so I'm going to put you center stage now. If you just want to say a few words about your presentation before you go in and launch it.
Yes, David. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me onto the panel this afternoon. It's very interesting talk and subject that we're going to go along. It's sort of I'm going to be showing a little bit about what we're doing in medical realities, how we started, where we are, where we're going, and also having a little bit of an insight into what I think might be the future. So hopefully I've got my slides all lined up. So when you give me the nod, I'll start to share those with everybody.
Okay, off you go, Steve.
Okay, it will take, sorry, it will take a little bit longer than you think it's going to take. Well, as David said, we started medical realities off. We think of ourselves now as a technology-enhanced healthcare service for training and education. And I started it 5 years ago with a fantastic surgeon called Dr. Shafi Ahmed. And it's been a really fantastic journey. We got in very early. My background is in augmented reality and virtual reality in other sectors going way back to 2005. So when I started talking to Shafi about what we could do about certain problems that he perceived in the healthcare sector, that's really how we came up with medical realities. when we started, which was 5 years ago, it coincided with the Lancet publishing a very, very interesting report about the state of healthcare worldwide. And that report sort of spurred us on even more into doing what we're doing, because it actually showed that 2/3 of the world's population didn't have access to safe or affordable surgery. And part of the problem is to be able to provide safe and affordable surgery is how do you train people in that sector? And it's very challenging. It's very challenging in the medical sector, and it's even more challenging now because of COVID. And I'll come into that sort of a little bit later on. So we've designed to sort of try and help solve the problems, right? Just making good health is a fundamental necessity for everybody worldwide. We need to educate the workforce. And the way it was being done, really, we started off by looking at surgery in particular. And that training medication hadn't changed for around 120 years. So we thought we could actually use new technology, especially virtual reality, because we want to disrupt healthcare and benefit billions of people worldwide, because we are talking about billions of people. 2/3 of the world's population is 5 billion people. So the platform we've devised is meant to be scalable, and it works in a number of different ways. One of the major problems about educating people is actually how do you access them, or how do they access the education? So before the pandemic, people used to go to lectures, or they used to go to operating theatres and see what was happening, or take tours of the hospital. Now, of course, that's not possible. So using something like virtual reality and immersive technology, we can actually bring the training education to people no matter where they are. It's very disruptive because in actual fact, it's going to reduce costs significantly. And some of the costs that we're seeing, we're starting to run CPD courses to actually sort of help people in ongoing training. And we're seeing a saving of up to 80% on CPD courses compared to traditional methods. And it's effective. Actually training and educating people using virtual reality and immersive reality is the best way to train people. It's actually quantifiable that they're sort of taking on board all the information very, very quickly, and the information is actually lodging in their brains. Much better than lectures, much better than anything else apart from one-to-one training. So we're really excited about where we can take this on and take it forward. Part of our technology was when we started off, we were sort of groundbreaking into this area, and nobody had done it before. We had to sort of create a lot of the systems. And two of the main systems that we started off was actually we created a thing called Spatial U, which is in actual fact a content navigation system. And we're actually talking about a lot of content here. We're not just talking about operations or actually sort of one-to-one showing people how to do things. It's also talking about exams. It's also looking at background notes to the patient, X-rays, CT scans, MRI scans, that sort of thing. We need a way to be able to show that seamlessly in a virtual world, and that's why we created Spatial U. And there's a lot of things that we need to do because we're actually sort of getting into the examination side of it as well, where people can take exams and take courses virtually and be approved and credited in virtual reality. And we also sort of created what we call our 360 plus player, which is a really sort of simple way for us to, in actual fact, add value to what we're doing in 360. I can go on and answer more questions about that later on if you like. I'm going to show a little video here that actually sort of shows a little bit of what we do. Basically, the sort of VR headset, obviously, the immersive platform, there are lots of things you can see, CGI animations, Also that we've filmed a lot of operations, and we've added hotspots to those operations that will actually tell you sort of drill down details of what's actually happening inside the operating theatre, so that people can see exactly what's happening. We've also been doing OSCE tools for students, and we're actually sort of translating into full simulation mode now. This is one of our simulations actually for sort of starting off for a chest drain, and that's where we see the future sort of going. So we're calling it technology enhanced healthcare. Some of the people and companies that we're working with, we actually work remotely with a university in Italy, in Bari in Italy. In fact, they have a campus also in Madrid called AIMS, and we work on their particular program that they're doing. So a lot of the students see operations that they need to have seen for their coursework. We're working with a big Danish company called Coloplast, which is providing us lots of information, and we're helping patients and nurses about sort of colostomy problems and things like that. Another company we're working with is Biopath, and we're ongoing sort of helping them to actually sort of train midwives especially about childbirth and special problems in childbirth. And last but not least on this slide, we've got Health Education England. We're working on a number of initiatives with them to provide training in different areas. That's not just training in surgical training, but that's training in lots of different things. And could it also, we're talking about actually sort of doing paramedic training as well. So go back to the sort of why AR and VR and why is it now? Why is it good now? Because it's reaching maturity. As I said, 5 billion people have no access to safe or affordable surgery or healthcare. Hospitals and clinics are accounted for a large share of what we're doing. And we're seeing fundamental changes in the way that actually the hospitals and universities and medical schools work, especially in the COVID-19 related world that we live in now. And of course, it's an ever-expanding problem, because as people live longer, they're going to require more intervention, more medical intervention. So we need more people to be able to do that. These are some of the collaborations that we're doing. We're actually collaborating in United Arab Emirates to actually sort of bring healthcare training into the UAE. Coloplast, as I already mentioned, we collaborate with the Royal College of Surgeons, and we're a fully accredited learning platform with them. We also have a fantastic relationship with ASSET, or the Association of Surgeons in Training, which is a core part of what we're doing. And of course, Shafi works at Barts and the Royal London, and Barts have been instrumental in helping us get to where we are now. And last but not least, we have a fantastic relationship with the University of Leeds and Lyme up there in Leeds, which is helping us go forward into the future. The special benefits of using virtual reality, I touched on some of them. Scalability. What we create actually is we're creating a huge library of training resources that can be accessed anytime, anywhere by anybody with the right equipment. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we've been positively impacted by COVID-19, because that's shown and pushed forward the need for remote training, and remote training in virtual reality and immersive reality is the way to go. Number 3, the contribution to humanity. That's one of our main driving forces, because we want to be able to help people not only in the developed world, but also in the developing world. It makes life more easier for people actually doing it. You don't actually have to go to specific places, or go to lectures, or go to a classroom. You can access this anywhere at any time. As I said before, it's cost effective to do, huge savings, and ongoing as we get more and more used to this type of thing, and as we roll out across the globe, the cost effectiveness will be even better. And of course, we actually like to make it fun to use and easy to use, and deliver collaborative work as well. And we're always looking to make new connections and new partnerships. So, and just on our journey, we've actually been pleased to win a number of awards. That really sort of wraps up about medical realities. I mean, looking into the future, we're going to see increased use of haptics and devices like that, but also we're introducing a lot of AI over the next couple of years into our courses, and that's going to be very exciting for what we can do. So David, that about wraps up my presentation. I hope I've covered everything that you wanted me to cover, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, Steve, if you could stop sharing your screen and so we can see you in your full glory. We do have one question for you, and that is from Noel O'Kelly, who's asking, is it just visual or does it also bring touch sensation to the platform?
Very good question. It is primarily visual, but we have, and we are introducing haptics to this. Some of the controllers that we use now are actually getting in there, and we're really pleased with the way things are going. So we're taking little small tiny steps into that area. The controllers that we're using, especially with the HTC controllers, are giving us a lot of tactile immersion and feedback, which is really helping us. But we see that as being something crucial to going forward, to be able to treat sort of haptics with gloves, where you can actually sort of do things like even threading needles and stitching virtual people up.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Steve. I'm now going to bring in Lucia Pannese and ask her just to initially, you need to unmute yourself to begin with, and then just say a few words about yourself and about Imaginary.
Okay, the button finally responded. Thank you very much, David, for inviting me in this fantastic round once again. Couple of words about Imaginary. We have the company since over 16 years, and we've always been involved in serious gaming and virtual reality, immersive technologies, and gamification lately as well. All these things, all these approaches, all these technologies, we pick and mix according to what we have to do and what the objective is. Probably it's worth saying that we're not an IT company. We are a multidisciplinary team. We have, for example, psychologists who work with us all the time. We have game designers, we have graphical artists. Of course, we have developers. So it's, I think, this interesting mix of people where sometimes you have taken part as well, David, with your inspirations, that makes the success of what we're creating. So one of the approaches that we try never to miss is to go through participatory design, which means including the end users, I would like to call them for a second, into the design of the solution. So in medical terms, this means probably two kinds of populations. One kind is the medical staff, so the specialists who need to use a solution, but the other part is the patients themselves. Because if you're producing some sort of solution that you hand over to specialists to treat patients, you have actually to involve both parties, because the software, or which in the end is the product that you're handing over, has to be tuned to the needs and to the expectations of both parties, which is not exactly simple, not straightforward, and you have to have access to those people. The way we do it is normally, or it has always been, going through EU-funded research projects. So we participate quite a lot to these big bids in Europe. So we have 3 to 4 years normally to take care of one kind of topic, to work against one objective, which very often goes in line with one of the solutions for so-called big challenges in Europe, which in the end are big challenges globally. Some 8 years ago, this big challenge was in a way tackling the topic of trying to reorganize rehabilitation for chronic patients, because as all the people working in this field know, we have unfortunately increasing number of patients in their various pathologies, but the number of specialists is, if we're lucky, staying stable. If not, it's going down. So in the end, the ratio of specialists and patients is very critical, and the costs of rehabilitation are extremely high. Costs in the broader sense, I would say, costs in terms of money, but also in terms of quality of life of these patients. Very often rehabilitation is too short. Very often people or patients do not adhere to the therapies, they're abandoned, and new occurrences come up, so people land in hospital again. And clearly there's a burning need there to offer some sort of scalable solution that allows very few therapists, very few specialists to take care of growing populations of patients. So this is where we have been involved since the last 8 years. And we have started with 2 of these EU projects, which I mentioned before. And we have been studying how to set up a framework that allows to do telerehabilitation. And of course, because we're a serious games company, our idea was to transform, I could call it traditional physiotherapy as well as cognitive stimuli into games that are meant to motivate patients, to empower them, to make them really protagonists in their rehabilitation journey, so that they take care of doing their exercises, so that they know where they are, they understand the point, and they want to go on taking care of themselves. So we came up with what is now our core product, which is called Rehability, which is a suite of rehabilitation solutions. I call it a suite because we believe that there cannot be one software, one product that fits all kinds of rehabilitation. You need to have one specific line for each of the pathologies. So for now we have the neurology version, so Rehability Neuro, which is recently being marked as CE medical device, and we're developing the cardiac and the respiratory versions of Rehability, because you need different kinds of rehabilitation for different kinds of impairments, issues, pathologies.
Shall we have a look at the video, Lucia?
Before I go on, I was saying I would like to give you a flavor of what I'm talking about, and then I can go a little bit more into detail. Should I do that, David, or will you do that? David, I see something strange. Okay. Can you put the audio on maybe, or should I can also talk over the video, David. I guess you're saying that I should talk about over it because you're muted. So this is actually a clinic in Milano using this solution. This is a real patient. This is a camera which is able to read the skeleton of the patient, in particular the joints of the patient, so that the patient is able to interact with the game without wearing anything, without holding anything in his hand. In this case, it's a man. And to interact with the games, the patient can use upper limbs, lower limbs, the balance, sometimes like in this case, or there are exercises where they have to stand up from a chair and sit down again. This is an example of a cognitive game, for example, and in this case, the patient was using the mouse. So even the parts of the body that the patients are using depend on, of course, on the kind of exercise that you want to put in place. The idea is to bring the therapy seamlessly at home. So what the patients can do at home is the same that they can do in the gym together with the specialists, with the therapists, who have also a quite rich dashboard, which is what we're looking at now, containing data in case also, as you see, a little sticky man, so a little video of how the patient was moving in front of the screen. And we've been actually winning a lot of international awards, and we have over 20 scientific publications about this solution. The idea was exactly as I said before, that the patients were co-designing the games. So we were capturing the motivation of neurology patients of the three main pathologies. So post-stroke patients, MS patients, and Parkinson patients, over 60 people between 60 and 95. So the idea is to have games for, in this case, adult patients with these pathologies. And we found out, for example, that it's very often ecological games, so games that play at home or in a home environment or in familiar environments, where patients can relate immediately the kind of exercise they're doing from the physiotherapy to what they want to do at home autonomously. So to be autonomous is one of the motivational clues that we found, because these patients, of course, try to have a life that is, again, as normal as possible. So several of these games are ecological, as we call them. Some others are then more metaphorical, more in the game environment. So something which has more fantasy in it, because once they understand that what they're doing is very well designed for them in the specific moment of the therapy, because each game has a set of parameters that have to be tuned for the single patient. Then they also understand that they can have a little bit more fun and they can do something which is a bit more far away from the everyday life they want to lead again. These patients have motivational indexes, which we researched and published, also of over 90% very often. That means that 9 patients out of 10 like this kind of rehabilitation a lot. They prefer it to traditional therapy, and they would like to suggest it to a peer. So what we do is that after discharge from a hospital, the patients can take very easy to use hardware at home with them, probably lent by the hospital. And it's, you have to imagine a sort of extension of the license of the system that the clinic has in the gym, so that the patient is doing exactly the exercises that are set for him or her in that moment of the therapy under data supervision. So what we saw before. In case, of course, therapists can change the therapy, and they can use exactly the medical rehabilitation protocols that they want. So in other words, the system is so flexible that it accommodates any kind of medical protocol that the hospital wants to put in place. It's not the other way around, of course. The technology that we use has to be very cheap and very easy to use, because if you think of a home use, for example, you would never be able to use technology that is quite expensive or complex to use, because you have to offer it quite broadly. And the idea is exactly to offer something that is scalable. So closing my presentation with what I began with, allowing the therapists to have more time to take care of more patients. I was recently talking to a very, very big hospital in Rome here in Italy. They have all the disciplines in rehabilitation. And this guy who has the task of reorganizing their rehabilitation offers, he was saying that out of 100% of the patients they have in rehabilitation, actually it's only 20% who really, really need to have a therapist at their side. The other 80% could work on their own. So imagine how many hours of a therapist are actually taken from those who need them more, and who could be which could be reorganized in a much more effective way, so that you have better organization, longer therapy times, and more efficiency. Of course, COVID has been mentioned before. I have to mention the word as well, because everybody expects it. Has, well, in a very disruptive way, in a very negative way, has started accelerating this process of taking up technologies to organize telerehabilitation. It's much more accepted. It's much more thought for, because hospitals know they have to have as a little number of patients as possible, and to keep them safely at home for everybody's safety, also of the medical staff. So these things are taken up a lot. And I saw that pharma companies are also very interested in this kind of therapies, which sometimes they call beyond the pill, or they talk about digital therapeutics, because they understand that there has to be something in parallel with medicaments to be organized. So pharma is actually at present a big driver of this kind of innovation. David, I'm afraid you're still muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much for that insightful look at rehability and the technology involved in rehabilitation. You mentioned the C, COVID word. I'm now going to ask Ricardo to come and do his presentation. Whilst I'm loading your presentation, Ricardo, maybe you could just say a little bit about your background. And for those of you who've asked questions, I apologize I've not got around to bringing him to the panel just yet, but we're running a little bit behind time. So we're going to try and deal with all of those questions at the end. Ricardo, please just introduce yourself, say a little bit about your background whilst I load your presentation.
Of course. Thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. My name is Ricardo Sainz. I am a consultant psychiatrist and a neuroscientist. Up until last week, I was working for a company that produces virtual reality environments and commercializes them as therapeutic tools for the treatment of mental illness. Prior to that, I worked for 3 years in a pharmaceutical company as a European medical manager for neurology and psychiatry. And before that, I worked for 18 years in the NHS in the UK as a consultant psychiatrist. I did a master's in research methods in psychiatry, and I've got a PhD in neuroscience at King's College. So when we planned this webinar, we planned to talk about the company I have just left, but because of the nature of my exit, that wasn't possible to do. And David, thank you very much for your flexibility and your suggestion that we rather than talking about that, we spend some time discussing the effects of the C word of COVID in a special population of people with pre-existing mental health problems. So what you are going to see today from me is a very sort of brief overview of a sort of extensive research work that we did from March onwards, when we were hit in Spain with the sort of confinement measures. And we wanted to ascertain the effect of the direct effects of the virus, if we didn't know at the time that it had any, but also indirect effects of the lockdown measures in the population. So we looked for papers coming from China first and Italy second, and then papers from the rest of Europe, and finally from the US. And what you're going to see here is a compiling almost 150 references over a couple of months. So we know that today, sorry, the previous slide, sorry, David. You could go back one.
Go back.
Sorry.
So long. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are 33.5 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, and this week we have surpassed the 1 million death barrier. Every country in the world has had to impose quarantine measures on the population, and we think that isolation may have inflicted long-term psychological injury, not just to people with mental illness, but also to the general population. So what we know, next slide, is that the virus that causes COVID-19 is a beta coronavirus that has a very difficult to ascertain incubation period, but it has been estimated to range between 2 to 14 days. We now know that from the point of infection to the moment one becomes contagious, there is a 4-day window. And we also know that to date, we don't have any specific or evidence-based treatment or vaccine for COVID-19. We all heard the news, and we know that there are certain companies that are advancing phase 3 clinical trials, and some of those have reported mixed results, from a very sort of strong immune response to very worrying side effects. So if you want to think about the time frame that we will have to probably get a vaccine, we know that the quickest vaccine that we did was the Ebola virus, and it took us nearly 4 years to produce. while the COVID pandemic has been sort of extending through the different countries, we are starting to see potential long-term neurodegenerative sequelae in people affected by the illness. And these are a direct effect of the virus in the central nervous system. And the WHO has asked countries, but also private companies and public institutions to coordinate a global strategic response against this. So what do we know about the effect of confinement in people with mental illness? Well, we know that psychological distress and psychiatric disorders increase in prevalence after natural disasters, and that's also the case for suicide. We know that nearly 30% of people will suffer from PTSD or depression, and there's consistent evidence of trauma following quarantine measures, particularly in healthcare staff, immediately after the quarantine period. From the various studies that we saw, we've seen fear in nearly 20% of the population, nervousness in up to 18%, and sadness as well, but also guilt and another range of psychological distress responses such as confusion, anger, grief, numbness, and insomnia. And in one way or the other, nearly 86% of the general population will experience at least one of these symptoms. So these, of course, have had an impact on the general population, but also on the groups at risk. The group at risk are the elderly and the young people, healthcare workers, but also people with pre-existing medical and mental health conditions. So we are going to focus on people with pre-existing mental health conditions, and we're going to talk first about those with neurodevelopmental disorders. So we know that people that suffer from autism, ADHD, and intellectual disability will be particularly hardly hit by the pandemic. We are starting to see anecdotal evidence that for some of these patients, particularly people with autism, confinement seems to have been beneficial in that it has reduced the uncertainty and it has made them more comfortable in daily routines. So it's not all bad news, but for the majority of these people, the pandemic has caused a considerable disruption in the support systems that are established at community level. So several groups have met to issue recommendations, and they recommend that face-to-face support, including therapy, education, medication reviews, and respite that are being relied upon, many have been dramatically reduced, and these could be delivered via telehealth instead. The next group of disorders are people that suffer from schizophrenia and psychotic disorders. These patients have a high risk of infection and infectious diseases, and they also tend to have worse medical outcomes than the general population. There is a sort of health divide in people with psychosis. We know mortality is increased in cardiovascular disorders, in people with psychosis, and they also die on average 15 years earlier than the general population. These persons have a heightened sense of fear, stress, and boredom brought by paranoid delusions, auditory hallucinations, and ideas of reference, mostly positive psychotic symptoms, but also negative psychotic symptoms that leads them to having maybe poor self-care or difficulty with a decision-making process. And that will hinder the ability to comply with health recommendations. I'm not sure how it is in other countries, but in Spain, it's pretty confusing. So yesterday, we could meet up to 10 people in outdoor spaces, and today is only 6, and we can meet indoors. And if you go out, you can maybe stay in terrace in a restaurant up to 10 p.m. But 2 weeks ago, we could stay till 1. And these public health measures are being communicated to the population in a very sort of scattered way, and it's very difficult to access this information. So people with psychotic disorders are going to find very difficult to follow health recommendations. The advice of working groups that are looking after this type of patients is that community support should be given using telehealth technology to both support patients in the community, but also to protect staff from difficulties in assessing these patients in the community. Another important group that will be affected by this are people with bipolar disorders. They face increased strain in the mental health. They will particularly suffer from disrupted sleep and routines, and also stigma. A lot of people with bipolar disorders are very functional, and they manage to engage in social and work-related activities. And while they do that, they rely on a complex system of support that sees them taking regular medication, but also receiving psychological input from therapists, and this will be disrupted. Insomnia and the sleep disruption is a risk factor to trigger manic episodes in this type of patients, and we have seen that insomnia in reports coming from China affect up to 20% of the general population and nearly 40% of healthcare workers. So it's going to be a big problem for them. Again, the advice would be to rely on telehealth solutions and to deliver these therapies remotely. There's other disorders, and we've done a sort of detailed analysis for each one of those. You can imagine that people suffering from affective disorders like depression and anxiety will see their symptoms rekindled, and they will suffer relapses from both. Patients that have obsessive compulsive disorders, particularly those with intrusive ideas of cleanliness, now see their fears validated, and they go back to the doctor saying, you see, I was right all along. I should continue washing my hands. And I have friends of mine, colleagues that are treating difficult to treat people with OCDs that are now washing their hands with bleach and having terrible skin burns because of that. People with trauma-related disorders will also suffer a relapse or reignition of the original trauma, regardless of how long that happened. And also people with eating disorders will be at a disadvantage because they will lose the support of the peer group and the access to multidimensional interviewing and therapies. Of course, sleep-wake disorders will be affected, and also people with substance-related and addictive disorders that rely on community support for both their medication and psychological input will be at a disadvantage. This particular group is a worry, because this is a risk factor for suicide. And when you couple that with the presence of affective symptoms or trauma-related disorders, and you sort of mix that up with the impending economic meltdown that we have, we know that suicide rate is going to increase. The prevalence of suicide at the moment is estimated in 800,000 worldwide, according to the WHO. And Patrick McGorry out of Australia has forecast an increase of 50% of suicides once the pandemic is over. And finally, people with neurocognitive disorders, those with Alzheimer's disease, that will find it very difficult to navigate the new measures, masks, social distancing, washing, but also they will be at risk of isolation and loneliness. And we know that the virus is particularly lethal in old age people, so they will be badly affected as well. So in summary, the pandemic is at the beginning. We haven't seen the end of it yet. Will cause untold psychological distress and will increase the prevalence of mental health problems in the population at large. Those with premorbid mental disorders will experience most likely worsening of their original symptoms, or even they will suffer from additional disorders to the ones that they had originally. And there will be, an increase in prevalence on affective disorders and PTSD. So what the recommendation of the WHO are is that therapeutic interventions should be targeted at a specific at-risk populations. The one-size-fits-all is no longer valid, and we will need to identify those that are at a higher risk in our societies and pull together to deliver tailored interventions. And they suggest that we use as an approach a stepped care model, which means that we identify the needs of these patients and we treat them accordingly to their needs. So patients that can be treated remotely using telehealth we will have to do that. If a patient's symptoms are severe enough to warrant a face-to-face intervention, they will have one, and then that will escalate to hospital admissions. So the role of telehealth and virtual reality is going to be paramount. For some of the things that my sort of co-panelists have said earlier, they need to be scalable and they need to be cost effective. So these are some suggestions like video-based telemedicine or wearable sensors to measure physiological measures, treating anxiety disorders using virtual reality environments that we know alter the neurobiology of the connection between prefrontal cortex and amygdala, and we know that it has been effective in reducing stress and treating this type of disorders. I think that one of the things that we will see is that the healthcare model that we have up to date, which is based on a one-to-one model, is no longer valid, and we, with prevalence of up to 86% of psychological distress in the general population, we will need tools that will allow a therapist to engage with as many patients as possible. So I think that's the end of my presentation, David, and I give the mic back to you, and thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Ricardo. I'm going to just go through very quickly an example of a gamified immersive learning environment designed for preventative healthcare. Now, this is a proof of concept demonstrator. The game only actually lasts 6 minutes, so I can guarantee not to go on any longer than that. But if you'll bear with me, I'll show you this example, which in its latest version is available in 6 different languages. So I loaded up straight away and just run very quickly through this. So this uses a rapid, essentially what I would describe as a rapid prototyping tool, but it can make serious applications across a wide range of different sectors. This particular one is aimed at citizens, and you can see on the opening screen that the instructions are in 6 different languages. So if I click to continue, now this is where my 6 minutes starts, and the journey begins in Kuala Lumpur. And so when the application loads, it gives you a basic list of instructions, and you can change the language very easily just by clicking on the flag. So if I click on the Thai flag, Korean, Vietnamese, I'm afraid my Vietnamese is non-existent, same as my Chinese or Malay. But all of these, all of the prompts and what you see on the screen will appear in the language that you choose. I'm going to go back to the language that I know and begin by looking at the game objective and rules. So the idea behind this game is to create a fun environment with a challenge to try to get from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore, and in between learn as much about coronavirus as possible and protect yourself against the challenges of coronavirus before finish up at a hospital to take a blood test that you need to take before you go back to Singapore. Now, I recommend when playing this game to make it interesting and randomized that you use a set of cards, playing cards or cards to play. What I'm going to do is bring up the first screen, the question, and this is where you choose a mystery destination. Now, I would normally do this by picking a card, but I'm just going to stick a pin in the card. Effectively, I don't know where this is going to take me, but this will take me to a place called Taman Botanica, which is the Botanic Gardens in Kuala Lumpur. And all of these environments allow you to look round and explore, where you can find different hotspots and navigate round those hotspots to protect yourself. So I just click on the information button again. And each information button gives you a little bit more information about coronavirus and what you can do to protect yourself. So now I need to find a hidden hotspot. I know I want to get to the airport in order to be able to fly to the hospital to take my blood test. So I'm going to go straight to KLI International Airport. And here I'm told that what I've got to do is to look round and find a face mask and hand sanitizer. I can see the face mask on the floor there, and that brings me with a question. No, it's not a question. It's telling me that by selecting the face mask, I've boosted my health score. And you might notice at the bottom of the screen, you've got health status, and you've got a health score at the top of the screen, along with the amount of time remaining. So I'm going to click on the hand sanitizer. COVID-19 is that the official name for illness caused by coronavirus? Yes, that is true. So now that will take me straight to the blood testing unit in a hospital in China. And what I need to do now is to find the hand sanitizer that will give me a question that will allow me to get back to Singapore. So what is the name of the drug that can improve my chances of surviving COVID-19 if I need a ventilator? So all of these drugs are quite sensible, and all of them, apart from Domestos, but even that has been mentioned in America as a potential way in which you can protect yourself against coronavirus, but I know it's dexamethasone. So I click on there, and here we are. We're in Singapore, and I've got to find the hidden coronavirus hotspot to complete the game. Now, I know at this point I've got 1 minute 34 left, so well, there's a hand sanitizer. I'll click on that. You can boost your health score here by answering this question: what is social distancing? Well, I guess it's avoiding people. Can you go to work if you've been in close contact with someone with coronavirus symptoms? Yes, no, or maybe. Well, I'm going to say no. Which of the following drugs will improve my survival? Well, I've already answered that elsewhere, so I'm going to dexamethasone. Well done. Now, all I've got to do is to find the hidden coronavirus to complete the game. Those of you who want to play the game yourselves without cheating, please look away now, because I'm going to look round. This is, by the way, Marina Bay in Singapore, and you'll notice that strange hotel building at the end there, and also over there you've got the lovely gardens in Singapore. I'm going to find the coronavirus hotspot, and what's the best way to protect yourself against coronavirus? Well, all of the above things. So now that I've finished the quiz, before the 6 minutes up, it tells me what my score is. I got 7 questions correct. I didn't find too many items, and it's given me a health status of 290, which qualifies me as being a normal life patient. But I could do better, and I can do better if I want to repeat the quiz. Or for those of you who have got learning management systems, you can embed these types of quiz games within an LMS, and you can download the CSV files to analyze your performance. So that is a very quick overview of this game. We have 3 minutes left. I'm just going to have a quick look at what questions we've got, and see if I can direct these to one of the panelists. So one of the questions about by Tim Foreman, which is quite important, is medical insurance coverage available for the use of these virtual or augmented technologies? I'm going to ask Steve. Do you happen to know the answer to that, Steve?
Well, it's a very good question, David, but I'm not entirely sure of the right answer. We actually haven't come across this ourselves specifically, but I think that it will become more and more a norm as things progress and people actually sort of embrace virtual reality and augmented reality as a whole. And I think companies like Facebook are obviously driving this as well.
Ricardo, do you know whether medical insurance is now becoming available to treat these disorders using VR?
I don't know the answer to that specific question. What I know is the company I used to work for developed this tool for therapists, and the therapist used to bill the insurance company as if they were doing an individual session. So they didn't bill extra for the use of virtual therapy. They just used it as a tool to deliver treatment. I also know that the FDA has approved Achilles virtual reality video game for ADHD and can only be issued with prescription. So I would imagine that if a prescription is necessary, there will be a medical insurance company that will pay for that.
Lucia, with the Rehability, do you know what's the situation with medical insurance and Rehability?
The situation is the following. Actually, we were asked by a pharma company to be insured, but there is no such insurance. So we were checking all the Italian insurance companies and there is no such insurance, also because we don't treat the patients and we are not in contact even with the patients. So we deal only with therapists and medical specialists. Medical doctors have an obligatory insurance, so they have one or they cannot be doctors. And so what we could do is to cover ourselves as producer of a medical device. In the end was just a sort of normal insurance for a software company. So the one that protects you from potential bugs in the software or things or breaches in data or things like that. And for the rest, there is just the terms and conditions that and the whole risk analysis where you're taking the patient through the potential list of risks that they face. But in the end, that's only the only thing we could do.
Yeah, I think there's two angles to this, actually. The first angle is just what you've been referring to, Lucia, as to whether there's any indemnity for the use of virtual reality and technologies like Rehability. So can you ensure, if you're the supplier of a solution like this, can you indemnify yourself against any damages? I think that's one issue, which is very important. But the other important issue is that if people are using VR and a telehealth solution, will the insurance company pay the costs of that treatment? And my understanding is that with a lot of these new technologies which now have FDA approval and CE marks, then medical insurers are becoming obliged, because it is a verified treatment, then and it does produce savings in terms of the costs of the insurance, then medical insurance companies are coming round to the idea of being able to pay for these technologies. So Denise Silva just asked, you mentioned that pharma's interested in VR. This is also something that I found as a trend. Pharma companies are becoming more and more interested in these types of solutions, partly because they want to diversify away from drug treatments, and partly because they recognize the medical benefits that a lot of these solutions provide. So I'm just going to take one more more question before we draw to a close. And it's one that Tim Forsman asked at the very beginning. What are the greatest challenges for these wonderful pioneers with connecting to big medicine when you're talking about these bleeding edge kind of technologies? So what have the main challenges been for each of you individually in trying to bring these solutions to market? So I'll just go very quickly around the panelists. Steve, what have been your biggest challenges when you've been doing this?
Right, again, an excellent question, David. It's a sort of like, we found that when we started off that we had to do two things. Because we were right at the beginning of this, we had the problem of actually getting people to understand what virtual reality was in the first place. As things have gone on, it's becoming easier and easier. So people understand more and more about virtual reality, and that's only going to get better. And the same will happen with augmented reality. But as with all things, people are sort of averse to risk, and so therefore you've actually got to sort of we find we have to double our efforts in order to show the actual sort of benefits of using immersive training and education systems.
Okay, Lucia, what have been your challenges at Imaginary?
Well, the challenge is still there because it's the lack of reimbursement officially, which is being dealt with, and it's well being organized right now, but it's not fully in place. So that's the biggest barrier. And the other one is the lack of organizational support, because you cannot just throw a digital solution into a hospital. You have to have organizational processes to support it, and they have to reorganize their way of working. So this is coming up, and it's being settled bit by bit now.
And Ricardo, finally, your observation on this?
I think for me the most difficult thing has been to ensure the alignment with the regulatory framework. Pharma companies and insurance companies are highly regulated industries. In the UK, pharmaceutical company is more heavily regulated than the financial industry, for instance. And when you go into digital health solutions, the founders have to decide whether they want to play in the wellness area or the digital therapeutics area. And if you want to play in the digital therapeutic area, then you have to go through proper regulatory channels. Otherwise, pharma companies and insurance company will not be able to acquire your product and incorporate to their pipeline.
Yes, I'll just make a final observation on that question, and that is something that has come out in a discussion that I had with Ricardo when I first met him, and that is to do with the fact of the way traditional clinical trials operate. So the medical profession, particularly with pharmaceuticals, they have a process which involves very large-scale clinical trials, such as we're going through now in the development of a vaccine and a treatment. And this involves literally tens and thousands or hundreds and thousands of patients looking for unexpected and damaging side effects and being able to manage the clinical effectiveness of this. When you're talking about VR and immersive technologies and the solutions that we've seen today, it's complicated by the fact that the technology changes so quickly. You know, new virtual reality headsets come on stream virtually every few months, and the software platforms also change, the operating systems of mobile phones. So this means that the traditional model of clinical trials goes out of the window, because it's totally impractical to effectively put a new software development through the same clinical trial. So this is a real challenge that has to be addressed in some way to look at more evidence-based clinical outcomes, and maybe even to accept that with any kind of treatment there is always a level of associated risks. And as Ricardo pointed out in his presentation, COVID-19 is really having it's a global disaster. There's no other way no other way of describing it. And it's a global disaster, not only because of the number of people who have been infected and whose lives have been spoiled, the people that have died, but in my view, it's a global disaster for the economic consequences of lockdown and all of the other restrictions, and a growing number of medical problems that are bit like a snowball that's rolling down the hill. Until we get an effective vaccine, or even when we get an effective vaccine, we will have to deal with mental health issues and a range of other problems which may result in a bigger death toll than we've had from COVID-19. And so that's my 2 pence on the table. And I just want to thank my panelists and also the participants for joining me this afternoon.